with this set of projects specific to some of the infrastructure work that we've been doing. I think we sort of look at it from this green infrastructure lens because it's a way to frame a lot of the environmental issues that we work on at the GLA through a solution, through a potential solution. So green infrastructure is not necessarily the only solution to a lot of the problems we're tackling, but it is a key one, and it really does cross many different topics. As you can see here, I'm sure you all understand what the definition of green infrastructure is, what we're talking about. We're talking about the network of green and blue spaces across London, designed and planned to manage on specific issues ranging from health, well-being, flooding, air quality, cooling, transport, biodiversity, ecology, everything. So you may have known that we released the London Environment Strategy. The final version went out in May. So this covers, it brings together a number of different strategies that we had before, and it pulls it all into one place. These are sort of key topics that are covered. But it is quite integrated, part of bringing it all into one strategy to integrate those things across the different topics, but also across other issues that we are dealing with, whether that's housing or culture, things like that. Specific to green infrastructure, we have some key aims and objectives related to increasing green roofs and green streets, protecting biodiversity, promoting natural capital, the concept of natural capital, and also making London a national park city. We also have the London Plan, which is currently going through revision. So the draft London Plan, the second round of revisions of the draft London Plan are out now, going to examination in public early next year. And in there, we also have a lot of policies that we that either are the same or we strengthen related to protecting existing green space, green belt, national alternative sites, but also promoting green infrastructure, whether that's sustainable drainage, river restoration. And then we have kind of a new thing now that we're the green factor, which is kind of a simplified way to help new developments understand how to increase green infrastructure on their developments. It's not a replacement for actual sort of ecological assessments or real like sustainable drainage planning, but it gives a way to understand at a glance how well developments are doing. So that is kind of the context in which we are working. So as part of that, we also, within the strategy, we have a few targets as to increasing green space, green cover, and tree canopy cover across London. And so one of the big targets for London to be more than 50% green by 2050 in the face of a lot of population growth and development that will happen and has to happen. And also increasing our tree canopy cover by 10%. So before I go into focus, I want to talk about two projects we've done now to gather data on the specific issues, green cover and tree canopy cover. So there have been many studies on both to try to estimate how much green cover and tree canopy cover we have. One of the big hurdles with the existing information out there that we wanted to tackle was to be able to actually have spatial data. So the estimates that we have, so the previous best estimate as to the green cover across London was 47% green cover, and that was based on a whole amalgamation of different data sets done by Giggle. And at the time, that was the best we had, but it was really just a number, a percentage number. We couldn't tell you where that green actually was. And that was similar to the work we've been doing that had been done before on tree canopy cover. All we had was using kind of iTree methodology, and that gives you a number based on your whole area. But again, can't see where that is or be able to target the areas of London or within boroughs where there's more need. So that's what led us to go down this path to put together these data sets. So just, I'm going to go really fast through it, so if there's more questions, we'll talk later. But so we commissioned aerial part of the remote sensing data, originally at 10 centimeter per pixel resolution. Ultimately, the computer processing power needed to process that is too much, so we ended up reprocessing at 25 centimeter resolution. And we use this for both the green cover and the tree canopy cover mapping. We'll start tree cover mapping. sure you are familiar, I'm hoping you're familiar with NDVI, which is really sort of common index used with remote sensing data and near-infrared data to identify vegetation through essentially chlorophyll. That's what you see here on the red. That's the near-infrared layer showing green vegetation. And so it's existing sort of methodology that's out there. So we started with that. And one of the key things is having to come up sort of the threshold of what becomes green or not green. And so we did a lot of sampling to identify what sort of NDVI score came up for different types of land. So whether that's fields, grass, trees, or building, shadows, bare grass, we got sort of a range, and we were able to find, we found like the sweet spot of what did count or not count as green fell between NDVI score of 0.05 to 0.1. So we use that threshold, that NDVI threshold, to identify sort of green cover across London. But because the photography was taken in September 2016, and so it sort of takes all day to take photography. So the amount of shadow in some imagery, and of course not everything was green at that time, so it's not a perfect estimate. And so you'll see, like, so on the left, this is the near-infrared data, but on the right, we filled in green what past the NDVI threshold that they set, and you can see kind of where the blue circle is, where there were sort of bare patches. We kind of knew it's normally green, but in this particular image, it's coming up as green. So we took a next step of adding to that NDVI data, filling in the gaps with existing known data sets. So in this case, we used UK maps, land use data, to fill in some like public green open spaces that we knew were green, and then also to fill in blue spaces. We use OS master map to do that. That's a preview. Okay, so we're releasing this very soon. Hoping beginning of next month. So put me on that. But here we are. We actually see for the first time in London, at least, the ability to actually see where there's green cover. I didn't quite define. So green cover is any sort of green space. It's not necessarily publicly accessible or open space. It includes sort of tree canopy and greeners. So it's the amount of green you can see looking from above. And here's sort of a detailed view of it. So you can kind of see we're picking up sort of green verges, we're picking up street trees, we're picking up courtyards within buildings, quite a lot of detail. You can see we're not picking up like paths in public parks that we have to know about. So you can see that in Hyde Park. So we sort of did this based on the two different thresholds, the 0.05, which is a typo now, and 0.1. And I'm not going to go into the detail of how we did the accuracy checks, but we came up with a range of what percentage of London is considered green and blue also, with kind of a higher accuracy on the high end of our range. It's not sort of public yet, so it's not on the slide, I would say. So we're roughly between 47 to 51% green. Help me in that. It's not finalized public yet, just so you know. And we gave a range because it is really difficult to get an exact picture of, at any given time. There's always going to be some margin of error. It depends on the imagery, it depends on the time of the year, it depends on what you do and do not count. But that's sort of the best estimate we have, and it gives us a picture of what we have to work from in terms of the baseline when we're assessing our progress in the future. But it also, again, big sort of benefit of this is we have now the spatial data, and now we can analyze this data and send other sort of data, whether it's sociodemographic or building footprints or anything like that, which is not something we were able to do before. So it's really fast, so we have to work. So we, in parallel, we're working on same sort of process with tree canopy cover, In this case, it's a little bit trickier because trying to distinguish between trees and other sorts of vegetation is much more difficult. You can't just use straight NDVI for that. And I know there's a lot of work going on, including in Seattle, about incorporating LiDAR and things like that. But we took one approach, and we did this in partnership with a startup called Redboard Labs, who created the Curio tree app. I don't know if you've heard of that before. So their big mission is to engage people in talking about trees and green space. And they have received a grant from the European Space Agency to look into this kind of work. You know, how and the big thing was doing this. There's also different ways you're able to look into, like the texture or something. So what we as humans perceive as texture, when you're looking at an image, you can kind of see like a tree looks different than grass based on texture. They're able to identify. that's really fast. Through some of those data sets. I'm going to switch over to the focus map. Hopefully we have some burning questions about those two data sets. So those data sets are going to feed in eventually. The installation or addition of green infrastructure in other areas, but being able to tackle like the right issues for those locations. And we're hoping not just us at the QA, but the boroughs, funders, other stakeholders can also use these tools and information to make sort of decisions. I covered most of that. I guess the big thing we always have to say is that it is only a tool, it's not perfect. The data sets in it are not all perfect, so it's just something to help guide decision making and help guide us in terms of planning for green infrastructure and being able to do that right. And this is not just, this helps sort of us as we're funding. We have a lot of grant programs to do with green space and tree planting within our team, but also in the wider GLA development, the growth fund and other things like that. So to be able to inform those decision making processes in terms of how to design green infrastructure to actually address the problems that those locations have. So this is just a summary of the different data sets that we actually have within the focus map. I'm happy to go into any one of them in detail if needed, but so we've got 14 different variables that we're looking at: water quality, flood risk, urban heat island air quality, biodiversity, active transport, noise, public open space, mental health, early years health. All related or proxies for things that we believe that community structure can contribute to. And then these are the data sets that we're actually using to represent those variables. Again, some of them better than other data sets. I think that's part of why, why we're in this conversation is some information is really great, some of it is really easy for us to sort of translate into our map. But a lot of it is not, and a lot of it is proxies, very, very imperfect proxies. Biodiversity in particular is one that is not a good data set. We know that, but there's almost nothing better at the moment that we know of. Then we also have a number of what we call context layers. So these are just layers that may or may not have a direct link to green infrastructure, but are helpful to have as reference. That's a lot of like political boundaries. But also sort of population information and other demographic information. This sort of split between these two types of data sets will become more clear when I show you the actual focus map. Let's see, I'll just switch over. And this is what it looks like in process. I'll show you, I'll just talk about it in this screen and I'll switch over to the live demo. But we're looking at London, and in this screen, the brighter white it is, the more of a need there is for green infrastructure. This particular screenshot is showing road noise. So it's somewhat predictable. The areas where there's roads, it's brighter white, as you can tell. Those are the areas of need. On the left here, you have a panel that shows all the different variables that we have. And it shows you kind of the score of need for an individual hex. So you can see we have, we're using a hexagonal grid, which is what sort of TFL has been moving towards for a while now. And it's 350 meters across from flat side to flat side. We think it's sort of, we were using LSOA previously, but we find that this hex grid scale is a finer scale, kind of like a neighborhood scale, so you can see a little bit more detail. But it's also it's a consistent grid geography, so it's easier to compare places, whereas with LSOA it's a little bit all over the place. So here we've sort of selected one hex, and you can see what the level of need is for grid infrastructure on each of these variables. So the longer the bar, the more need. You might see also there's kind of there's a white line on some of them out here, and there's a red line across. So on the variables for which there is some sort of target or legal limit or something like that, we've set a threshold. And that's what this white bar indicates. And then if the variable exceeds that threshold, the whole thing turns red. So it helps to identify that. Because the thing is, these bars are not normalized against each other. All the different data sets that are used here are not measuring the same thing. They're not normalized against each other. So there needed to be kind of a way to compare them, or at least understand what actually is good or bad. And that's what we've done by setting this threshold, so you can actually see, for pedestrian activity, that particular hex does not have a lot of pedestrian activity at the moment, so it's a lot of need. Whereas on, it looks like it's exceeding and a lot of different things actually. So there's not really a good comparison here. Water quality is just under the threshold. It's just over. I'm just going to pull up the live one now. So you kind of like log into the map. This is sort of the home screen that you get. So on the left panel, you get an explanation. So it opens on a composite score. So it's all the variables combined. And for better or worse, it's not a weighted score. It's literally just a count of how many of the other variables have exceeded their threshold. We had wanted to do some sort of weighting on this, but there was, because of the inconsistency of the quality of the different data sets and the thresholds themselves, it was really complicated to do that. So we've kind of done the most basic version. So you can kind of see, across all those different variables, highlights where there is need. You can kind of see, like, obviously central London, a lot of the road networks. This patched darker area, which means less need, is Richmond Park. You kind of get a sense of where the need is across London. And so from this screen, you can do multiple things. You can choose a different variable you want to look at specifically, or you can select a hex, and it pulls up. Yep. It would pull up a score here. It's not working right now. Why it's not released yet. Still working out a few bugs. I'm just going to refresh it. But there we go. So that's what it shows. So for that hex, this is the score, and you can sort of sort them by the amount they exceed the threshold, the given threshold. So you can kind of identify what are the key issues for that particular area. So in this case, sort of road noise, cycling, air quality, particulate matter are the biggest issues in that area. Whereas, for example, health deprivation, combined sewer flood risk, water quality are not as big of issues in that area. And we're looking at that difference because while the green infrastructure has multiple benefits, there are certain benefits that certain green infrastructure can do more with. So you want to be able to design your green infrastructure to actually address whatever specific issue you have in mind. You can also, you can enter a specific postcode or an address. You can actually select by different areas. So, in this case, the default is to select by the hex. You can also select by borough, and it. Oh, there we go. So it summarizes all the hexes within that borough. If you want to be looking specifically at Greenwich in this case, kind of do the exact same exercise. We have that for wards, LSOAs, and opportunity areas as well. And then we have a number of other context layers, which I discussed before. So these are just things that we've overlaid on the data so we can compare, but it's not actually sort of factored into this sort of score of need that we have here. So let's go on here. So we've got our air quality focus areas identified. So that's kind of like, I probably shouldn't click that one, but so we have sort of public open space. We'll also have that green cover data that I was talking about earlier in here. So you can kind of identify, you know, if it's an area that doesn't have green cover, you know, you've got different opportunities for installing new green infrastructure, or if it's already got existing green cover, then it's about enhancing it. There's just some green space you can identify. So there's Richmond Park. There's some of the demographic data as well. Like population data. Sort of dot transparency you can see. So here it's sort of the brighter the pink, the higher the population. So you might identify that there's a lot of need for green infrastructure in a certain area, but then you identify that that's actually, you know, like an outer area that doesn't have a huge population. Which is not to say there's not still a need for green infrastructure, but it might be a different approach. In that case, you might really want to focus on biodiversity, whereas, you know, you don't need to focus on, you know, road noise or whatever that, you know. So it's sort of providing as much information as possible, but in a kind of simple to use tool to try and make those decisions across the different needs and solutions that are involved in infrastructure. How much time I have left? So, all right, that's good because I'm about done. So we were able to actually look at the map. So I was just going to say, so along with the map itself, we're also showing the data sets and the methodology behind those other two sets of data I talked about, and the metadata for all the variables, plus text level information, all the variables included in the focus map. We are also pulling together a resource guide. So if you sort of identified, okay, yes, road noise is my number one problem, and like what types of things can I do with the infrastructure to address that? Yes. So it's hopefully going to release beginning of next month. So once all this is out there, we're going to be using it to sort of assess against other data sets, and we're also going to use all of it to help inform the development of the next round of these all-living green rivers, which is not what we call it anymore. But yes, and we're using it going forward to help inform funding bids, other sort of grant programs, also supporting other work that we do. So we do a lot of planning application review for neighbor developments. It helps inform that. But yeah, so I think my contact info. If there's a question, or happy to answer questions, okay, or I'm going to pause there for a second. And apologize because the streaming there are people joining this meeting remotely. I've actually forgotten to ask them to say hello. Guys, would you mind introducing yourselves?
So I'll shout your name, and then if you can unmute yourself and just say where you're from. So Alison Smith.
Hi. Hi. Sorry, you want to introduce myself?
Yeah.
So I'm from the University of Oxford, and I'm really observing at this event because I've just got an interest in green infrastructure planning and assessment tools, and I did test an earlier version of this tool as well, and provided a bit of feedback. But I'm really just here to listen and learn because I don't have any actual relevant data sets myself to contribute to this. But it's a really interesting tool. Thanks.
Okay, Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire Scannell from the Met Office, and I'm the Urban Climate Services Science Manager. And like Alison, I'm just kind of here to learn about the tool and kind of observe what's going on. Thank you.
And Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Perry. So I'm from the University of Leicester, and I also work within NCEO. So I'm coming here from research into land surface temperature using satellite perspective. And specifically, I've done research that has focused on looking in the urban environment at medium to high resolution surface temperatures and how that can be fed into decision making for things like heat risk, urban heat islands, and I'm really looking to see how we can incorporate that with what you're doing.
I'm Ryan Turner, coordinator of the Space for Climate group, and I'm sorry I have to run out to allow people to come in, so I think I missed the introductions, but thank you all for coming.
Great.
And I should say we're recording this session. To what end and purpose, not quite sure. We'll check with presenters if they're happy with the information to be shown, might even make this available for others to see. We'll just see it in a moment, but at least just to make you aware it's being recorded. When you do ask a question or make a point, can you please say your name and organisation? If you want to make a point in a Chatham House manner, if we want the GLA to benefit from this session as much as possible, please just say off the record, even if it's after the point, and then I'll just know that we shouldn't make that discussion available.
Okay, we'll take a couple of minutes. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, I've got a quick one. Very nice from Scotland. You say on the presentation that the data is downloadable. But there's some limitations on what would be downloadable. Is that because the data itself is sensitive, or is it?
Yeah, so most, let's say, majority of the data sets are publicly already. They're all, most of them are from, EA or something like that, or already on our data store. There's a couple data sets, I think at least one, maybe a couple more, so there's one from Thames Water that we're getting that probably won't be publicly accessible. So we might be able to provide a summary at hex level, but we won't have the detailed data set yet. So we're sort of working out all the lessons that will all be included on when we get loaded.
I was going to ask about how accurately can you go down, for example, to ward level or street level. Can you provide immediate reports out to say this street has this quantity or benefit?
So the finest detail that we have is the hex level. But you can, so we can sort of zoom in. You can kind of see. You can kind of see how much is within a hex. It's not quite street level. We had hoped at one point to do kind of a raw data input as part of this. You could see some of the information at the street level, but not quite at that stage. Now that might be a future phase. But you can sort of get summary reports. Yeah. So you're going to have this information summarized at the hex level or at any other area that we have kind of on a select area. So ward elsewhere, borough, and opportunity area level. And there's the ability to sort of download kind of a quick chart of information, and you can sort of get like a screen grab image of the map as well.
One question. This is Anna Sebastian from DMD. I didn't get the size of the exotic.
It's 350 meters, so from flat side to flat side. So it's from like here to here rather than from here to here. Yeah, so it's something that TfL has started like transferring a lot of their data into that same grid. So we're using the same grid that they are.
Rather than trying to local.
actually going up. So,
is there anything else being like this used elsewhere in Europe, like cities?
so we're not super aware of it. There's some other sort of subtype of this concept we've seen other examples of.
I have a presentation about a similar initiative in other cities, and one of them is in Liverpool. But I don't know the state of the pool because the project has already started, and each city has a different pool. So, yeah, but I mean, Liverpool is close to us. We can
Yeah, we did look at a bunch of other, I can't remember the exact places, but we did look at quite a number of other existing tools and things that are out there, both from other cities and sort of academic institutions. A couple of things that we found that was that a lot of times the data was at a scale that was just too coarse for the level. I mean, room structure is so local. So even the hex is almost, like not refined enough. But we were trying to get information at a much finer scale. And the other thing is We're trying to make the interface as easy as possible, so you didn't have to know JS, you didn't have to know even like the names of your data sets and specific things that you're looking for. You can kind of get it at a glance. That's sort of the balance we're trying to get there. Whether we achieve it in one question, that was part of why we were sort of developing this way.
And maybe in smaller cities, I have seen initiatives for urban forestry. So maybe the environmental services in London could use this as a base to fill it with more detailed data that can be constantly updated by LiDAR or photography, aerial data. About the status, the vigor and health status of each tree, right? Because they want to know, for example, when a tree is dangerous for a road and it needs to be cut down because it's sick and it's going to be pulled down by the wind, for example, it can be a danger. Or if you want to increase the biodiversity in one place, you want to increase the number of species. So this is beautiful as it is and very useful, but it can also be taken for the next step.
Yeah.
More specific uses, for example, for foresters, for the
gardeners. So we actually, so separate to this, we have the London street tree map, which is sort of an amalgamation of the borough street tree data and detailed data. It's not perfect, it's not complete, it's very much focused on street trees and public accessible trees, but we're hoping to do an update of that next year. And you're trying to find better, more information to include with it, so you can sort of identify, like, status of trees or vacant tree pits that could be sort of used again. A lot of different types of trees. It's tricky because in London, the boroughs themselves are the ones that manage this data, so try to getting all that together and all at a certain level of sort of data quality is another issue that we've been struggling with.
Okay, moving on. So then we have a couple of presentations that go for policy colleagues.
So I've kept the order, so it's all in here, so that everyone knows the order. So if I've received slides, they're in here, and if I haven't, then there's a holding slide, and then people are just going to speak that slide. Particularly people down the bottom of the room. If it's your slot, perhaps come up here just to speak, so the microphone can pick up for those that are online. So we've got the policy side of things now, and that was also an opportunity for the boroughs. For some, it might be the first time you've seen the tool demonstrated by Ali, so it's just a chance to give your reflections and say if there's a particular data need that this sort of provokes isn't there and you're interested in, because there are a lot of researchers and organisations that might actually be able to help with that on the meeting. But so if you can come here just to do your talk, and then I'll scoot round the side here. So we've got Oliver from
Yes, I don't have a presentation.
That's fine. Do you want to just come here? It's just so the microphone picks up the people online.
So hi, Oliver from Surrey Council. It's an incredibly powerful tool. Fantastic, very exciting. I know I'll be using it on a regular basis, and with my hat on from presenting the London Tree Officers Association, it's something, of course, that's being used inherently, as you say, for more discrete and applications such as how you manage urban forest. So one use for this would be how you do it, but be able to identify the species diversity and age mix, which is an essential way of managing any resource in terms of biological resource. But perhaps an example of how we would use this, and make my life and developers' lives a lot easier, is, for example, deciding how much mitigation is required. So, for example, the Haygate estate, quite well known, in Elephant Castle, had to lose a lot of canopy cover. And then lease were very good. Initially, they had a burn flood policy, but we sort of discussed it, and we came down to an idea of how we value the canopy cover with the community, who suggested use cover. So that's something else which might be able to, some such monetary system might be able to use. So we gave an idea of how much the monetary value was, plus 5%, as it was then, to end development. And this then will give us an idea of how much carrot value or monetary value we could target 10% by 2050 and then mitigate that not just within the wood line, but for example at Haygate across a kilometre radius. And the key point there is to link up green spaces by going by ensuring the green infrastructure, street trees, etc. Not just street trees, of course, not each tree is many parts of green infrastructure. Joining up the dots, but perhaps the also most recent example in Surrey is joining up Vauxhall to Canada Water, and that's the inner London green belt. So that will provide a fantastic opportunity to decide where GI is most needed. And like trees themselves, sometimes they're so big you don't see them. And there are opportunities on a wider scale, landscape scale, and this leads into the London Park as well, of course, how we can maximise the fine grain and the design of discrete incidental spaces, quality of life, but also the coherent links between larger spaces. And a key example of that is something called the Old Kent Road Opportunity Area, or Area Action Plan, which I like in OPAC. Memorable at least. So, yes, fantastic. Looking forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy from the London Development Brent. I came today to see what the tool would be like and how it could be used. So, in regards, I'm working on the open space study to inform a local plan, and I didn't know whether we had a layer on the map which had the public park categorisation catchment areas. I think from doing the open space study, you kind of look at them catchment areas to see how many of your, or how much of your borough has within the catchment area from Metropolitan Park, Fishing Park, and that. So if you could overlay that on the map, and then you could be like, oh, look, there's all these other different green spaces that could potentially perform that function, it would be beneficial in that way for me. Maybe potentially as well, as part of the open space study, you have to look at three components are accessibility, equality, and quantitative. So if it was possible to maybe have, if the boroughs have the data that have quality in regards to the green flag standard, like on there as well to see comparison wise, and then accessibility and getting the road network and tube stations and that. So yeah, that's how I'm looking at the green infrastructure. So yeah, it is going to be useful in developing these strategies. And one for with the urban green factor, would we have like a layer with new development and what urban green factor they achieve? So we could point to examples and how, like, develop the evidence by saying that this is achievable within a London context. But I don't know whether the tool could be used, but it would be something that would support the evidence. So yeah, that would be cool. Thank you.
So I'm just, I was going to say, on the UGF stuff, so the London plan with the UGF won't be released with us. So up until then, we are working on all the different sort of guidance and anything that would be helpful to go with that. And we're very open to know what types of things would be helpful. So in this case, sort of examples of the UGF. Yeah, we have not. This is definitely one.
And Marina?
So back to my
Yeah. Okay.
So hi, I'm Eleanor from Natural Engines, and yeah, we just came along to sort of hear about what you have created and just really listening to find out all about it really. And it sounds so exciting. It sounds like something that we will be able to really use in our role. Both Claire and I work as commenting on neighbourhood plans and local plans, and we feel that this will be really useful for sort of being able to target areas for green infrastructure, and especially one of our priorities is securing environmental net gain, and I think that this will be able to be really, really useful for that. We did notice that yeah, it looks really great, the GI focus map, but we sort of wanted, under the sort of biodiversity section, how kind of in detail that was, whether it kind of goes into priority habitats, designated sites, that sort of thing, or whether that's sort of project for the future, perhaps.
And that's one of the biodiversity layer is one of the ones we struggle with quite a lot.
Yeah.
The existing data on like priority habitats is not very good or accurate.
Yeah.
Or it's inconsistent, it's patchy.
Yeah.
And so we didn't want to use patchy information. So at the moment, we're only using proximity to things as proxy, which is not great. But we are very open to hear what other data sets we could use.
Yeah.
But we did look into priority habitats.
Yeah.
It's not.
We use our own web map tool, which does have priority habitat layers, but we have been obviously finding, like I think everyone, that those are quite out of date now, and it's hard to sort of keep them up to date. You know, it requires a lot of on the ground time to really survey those areas. But yeah, maybe we can think about it in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much me, and Claire as well.
Okay. Oh, we're really having fun about it. Actually, so hard at talking about it. So then we're moving over to academic research colleagues.
Okay, can I take that out?
Cool.
This is where I probably made I put in these slides in the wrong order, sorry.
I can do it.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry, UCL, I'm not quite sure where I've deposited your slides, they're in there.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm Mary. I'm from King's. I'm doing a PhD there with Martin Worcester, as you know. And the tool is great. I think I really like. I know that there's definitely quite a lot of, particularly students, probably master's students, who look forward to making a lot of use of it. But I wanted to talk to you today because we've got some data from a project we worked on previously, which might be useful for you. And it's hyperspectral airborne data, which was collected over London in 2010. So if you're looking for stuff like land cover change, for example, could be relevant to you. This is an example of some of the classification map that was produced. So this is over 40 bridge. You can see King's Sunset House up there. Yeah, so the data, as I said, it was collected in June 2010. It was collected by NERC, so they're the NERC ARF, in fact, the Airborne Research Facility. They're no longer operational, but the instruments have been bought by NCO, so the instrumentation which was used on the site is still available. They were delivered, the data is delivered, so it's geoprocessed, it's mapped to reflectances, so it's available for applications and very used in particular for stuff like this, for example. I won't go into much detail, particularly because people at the back probably won't be able to see anything there. But basically, there's two hyperspectral instruments. It's called the Eagle and the Hawk, and they come from the visible and the infrared, shortwave infrared. Each instrument has about 250 bands of spectral data, so you get really high kind of lot of spectral resolution. You've also got LiDAR, so from that we produced a digitalization map and intensity, which you can get tree cover, tree heights, and that's 2 meter resolution, and high resolution digital photography, which kind of can complement that. So that's more like Google Earth instead. All of this is freely available because the NERC ARF research facility there, all their data is freely available 2 years after collection, or indeed actually at the explicit permission of the PI, so Martin Worcester in this case. Here's an example of some of the imagery. This is Eagle, it's a true colour composite, and this is only a tiny bit of the flight line, because it's incredibly long. I just wanted to show you some of the footage. Again, this is, we're over here probably somewhere. Stop it. But it doesn't cover the whole of London, but it doesn't cover it from east to west. It covers it from north to south. So you wouldn't be able to directly make a map from this of all of them, but you might be able to use it for other applications. One of the main advantages is that it's the spectral resolution, as I've said. So on the left here, you've got spectral profiles of vegetation, water, and urban. So this is water, this is vegetation, this is kind of an urban landscape. And on the right here, you've got those, on the left, sorry, this is as mapped by the instruments on the plane.
this is as it would have been observed by satellites, and it's got really high resolution. So from this, the reason why it's really useful is you'll be able to distinguish not just between water and vegetation, but between live vegetation, senescent vegetation. A paper recently used hyperspectral airborne data to distinguish between different types of algae. So you've got a lot of application. I know it's used to distinguish between tree species. So you can applications for biodiversity, for example. Yeah, and then it's also very high spatial resolution. So if you're looking, you'll be familiar with this from using the aerial photography itself. But basically, as opposed to with something like Landsat, you've got a 30-meter resolution, maybe 15-meter. So you're lucky to get a tree. But with this, you've got multiple pixels on one tree. These are the trees on the south bank. Yeah, it was very nice day. Yeah, so it could be used. We thought this might be useful for you to either incorporate into the tool or to use it for some sort of analysis as kind of a comparison thing. The information about how you can access it is here. It's on the CEDA website, and it's freely available. Yeah. Yeah.
I think next is easier. I'm sorry, I just got the slides going the wrong way.
Hello everybody, so I'm Phil Wilkes from University College London. We use LiDAR quite a lot in our work, so a lot of these methods we've developed in tropical forests. We looked out the window one day and there's lots of beautiful trees around UCL, so we started mapping those in greater detail and built up to a London-wide estimate of forests. It's really interesting to hear about the aerial photography approach, but this is a purely LiDAR-based approach, so we do all of it. Take it over. So this is another presentation, so I can skip over a lot of these slides. And there's lots of beautiful trees in London. So yeah, so we've taken the TLS, so this is a terrestrial LiDAR scanner, so this is sort of a point, it doesn't move around, and we can build up these very highly detailed models of trees, so we can, instead of just seeing the tree as a whole, we can look at the sort of branch topology and estimate things like its biomass. We can upscale using the freely available Environment Agency airborne LiDAR data, and then what all of us can talk about is upscaling to a London-wide area using satellite imagery. So I'll skip over, I'll talk very briefly about this because this is more to do with estimating biomass, and this is quite high resolution, so it's sort of freely available data. But we use, as I said, we use a terrestrial laser scanner because trees are very difficult to measure. We can estimate their volume. So as I said, we're interested in the biomass, and we can estimate their volume non-destructively, which usually you have to look down the tree and weigh it, estimate biomass. So we can make repeat measurements. We scanned at 4 different locations across Camden. This is an area in Camden, and we can take these sort of unangled point clouds and make these tree model representations. So we had a few very nice days out across London at the beginning of 2016. Went up to St Pancras Old Church, the Hardy Tree, Russell Square, nice day out at Highgate Cemetery, scanning there. It's a very interesting place, and some street trees as well. So this is the kind of detail that we can extract. So we can extract individual trees with their shape, size, and all the other features as well. And I guess the message here is that we can do this quite accurately with very high, low uncertainties in our estimates. So this is at the sort of very high level. So how do then we upscale that to the larger areas? So we use the airborne LiDAR. Like I said, it's open source, so you can just go to the government the data.gov.uk data portal and download raster and the point data. So we've been using the point data. It's captured in 2015, 2016, captured leaf-off, but because we have the point data, that's not really so much of an issue. You can still extract trees. So this is an example of our data processing. So this is Mallet Street, just outside University College London. You've got the British Museum at the end of this street. So these are the trees that you can see from airborne LiDAR. This is the issue within urban areas and using airborne LiDAR, is you get a lot of noise from buildings and they look very similar to trees. So you have to try and filter out all this noise to look at the canopy layer. So we do this by using the metadata within the airborne, within the LiDAR point cloud itself. So it records how, so an outgoing, I don't know if you know much about LiDAR, but plane flies over, fires out a laser pulse, and it bounces back off the surface. It's recorded by the sensor. but it might have multiple interactions through its path back towards the ground. So we classify anything that has a multiple interaction as probably being a tree, because it hits down through the branches, whereas a roof or the road has just a single interaction. It bounces off that and comes back. So we can filter out all of that and just get this sort of proxy tree layer. We then do some clustering to identify groups of trees. By some further clustering, and we can identify individual trees within the scene. So this is again from Alex Street. We've got a bird's eye view and then this profile view. So this layer and this layer is from the terrestrial LiDAR, and these two layers are from the airborne LiDAR. So you see there's quite a good correlation between the two. So we can sort of upscale to the extent of the airborne LiDAR, and we're getting some results to the terrestrial data. So we applied this over Camden to estimate the biomass of urban trees. So we've got, this is up near Hampstead Heath, this is St Pancras Old Church. You can see, this is the good thing about airborne LiDAR, you don't just identify the presence of the tree, you can also pull out other attributes like its crown size and its height. So you can see here, we've got these very tall trees in St Pancras Old Church, and then on this like rail side reserve, the trees are much smaller stature, so you can pull out these other attributes. I'm very excited when I thought I found a 108-metre tree in the middle of London, but it turned out to be the telephone tower. So yeah, we can do things like estimate biomass and other attributes, maybe sort of proxies to biodiversity in the long run. So this was kind of one of the interesting things, just as an aside, that we found that there were patches of forest within Camden that had very high biomass, which was quite unexpected, and they sort of compared to subtropical forests that the biomass density is there. So it's sort of another value for trees, apart from their other assets in the other environmental values. So how do we go from these sort of area-wide tree maps? So you can see all the individual trees mapped here from the airborne LiDAR. This is the GLA London. So this is all the airborne LiDAR currently available from the EA. They are actually reflying the whole area this winter, so there'll be multiple coverage of airborne LiDAR data. So how do we go from this to map the whole area? And this is where I'll pass it to Ollie.
Hi, so Ollie Baines, University of Nottingham, but this is work that I did for my master's thesis with Bill at UCL last year. So, as he said, we have this limited coverage of airborne LiDAR, but we really want this London-wide estimate of tree coverage. So what we did was your results are really interesting to do with the high-resolution image, but we've done a wholly freely available approach. We use the freely available LiDAR to create a layer of tree crowns where we have the LiDAR extended. We then upscaled it using machine learning and freely available satellite imagery. So the estimates we produced were using Landsat, the initial ones, but we're working on using Sentinel as well to do even higher resolution estimate. But essentially, you compile the load data layers using Google Earth Engine. So we've got, like I said, textural, we've got temporal, we've got, we even use some ancillary data sets, so climate that might affect distributions, elevation. Even I use the sort of the OS buildings layer as well to try and work out the distributions of trees related to buildings. They fed all of this into something called a random forest model. To do with machine learning, and then that's compiled on R, so again another open source approach. And then the output we get did it for 3 variables. So the good thing about LiDAR, as we said, was you can get the height as well. So we did 3 variables. So what we did was we took the LiDAR data, and because the Landsat data was at 30-meter resolution, we compiled the LiDAR data to points. So we took all the tree crowns at a point, and we used that to create like a cover per point or a number of trees per point, and then heights like average. It was the dominant canopy height, so 95th percentile of height per point, and we then fed some model and used to extrapolate across London using these data sets. So it'd be interesting to see how it compared actually between the two. But the best estimate was for canopy. I haven't got the exact figures on me, but for canopy cover, we've got a slightly higher estimate, but it's going to go down. We're currently rejigging it at the moment, but we got 25%, but sort of broadly comparable, and it's going down. You can see sort of key areas. And then you can see sort of pockets. So this is the number of trees, and you can see it sort of as you would expect, less in the middle, more towards the edge, canopy height. But interestingly, canopy height as well is another interesting thing we can do in addition to, which is again related to things such as biomass, and you can see that you can relate the age of trees and things using knowing that height. So we then compared this to the IQECO estimate just to see how it compares. Again, we tried to do some comparison with that as well. Ours is a bit coarser, which made it more difficult, but when we have the Sentinel stuff being high resolution, you'll be able to get the estimate of the number of trees, canopy cover, and canopy height at 20-metre intervals, which would go beyond the hex thing, but could still fit into the tool, and maybe there'd be less problems with, since it's all freely available, there'd be less of a problem in just giving all that data out, so you might be more able to use sort of street level estimates and things as well. So we could compare it. You can see there's some quite key differences. We've got Havering and Hillingdon here, where there's some quite significant difference in the IQECO report, and that's, those of you who don't know the IQECO, the fact that they do about, I think it's about 800 plots across London and then scale that up. You know the area of a plot on the side of London. So it's a really good, really detailed methodology at the local level, but you beyond difficulties and that you're not going to capture all that spatial variation because London is highly heterogeneous, as I said, the urban area. And we can only use this to understand things. So this estimate is going to go down, but the UN defines forest as anything with more than 5 metres in height, 10% canopy cover over a contiguous area of 0.5 hectares. So using that, I just did a simple sort of found out the criteria, and London is a forest. Essentially, you can see areas of forest. You can see it's not perfect. It's got Heathrow. It's very forested, but we're working at the moment. We have the minimum input value of 1, but we're working that down to 0, and then to create. But then you can also overlay it with other data sets. So I did here just briefly, so the OS green spaces map, just to see where the distribution of trees were in London, relation to public and private space. Interestingly, it's quite sort of evenly split. I found that there was 14.5% of London were comprised in these green spaces, and it accounted for 14.5% of the trees, which was quite nice. And it's interesting because then you expect there's quite a lot of private ownership, and then in terms of targeting, you say about targeting things, perhaps it's not all in these public green spaces. Maybe you need to work with community initiatives together with the parliament or on long streets, etc. Yeah, the point here is that this is all sort of freely available data sets, and the plan is to, maybe not relevant here, but the plan is to then create a methodology that can be scaled to other cities across the UK, other cities in general, where if you can feed in a LiDAR data set, then we can just scale it up. So I'm working at the moment on, hopefully, I ran into some issues and putting it on Google Earth Engine on it does itself, but the plan is to release the art code and things, so people can work with it. Anyway, so as you know, sort of the value of using these, again, you said there's targets to increase canopy cover by 10%. So one of the key things of this freely available approach is, as you said, you can get this temporal change. So we've got this estimate. You have to make some assumptions in the number of trees when shown. This isn't that problematic over some time scales. So you could then, because the Landsat data for this long repository, we could then get it back in time, and then you can see exactly how canopy cover is changing, maybe even canopy height as well. So really useful for monitoring purposes. So, yes, thank you.
So where are we? You have people on the phone.
And that's just right there.
Not like
So we've had Mary already. Let me just see if James is on the phone. By the way, Marina's joined us online, and I said that she could speak maybe after the research is finished. And James was coming out of a tutorial, and I can't see him online from King's College London. So perhaps, Alison, I know you haven't got specific data to present, but do you want to just let us know a little bit about the work of the group at ECI, and from what you've heard, where you think perhaps the group might be able to perhaps link up with this initiative, or anything else you've heard today?
Yes, thanks. It's all been really fascinating stuff. I can't hear perfectly everything that's going on. I think I've got some technology issues. So if anyone can send through any slides or anything after the event as well, that would be really interesting. So where we're coming from is that we've been working with local authorities to try to develop toolkits of existing simple tools that can be used to map green infrastructure and assess its benefits, especially around Vista. So that work we've kind of done one project, and we're looking for funding to continue on that work. But we do a lot of talking to different end users, and they all tend to say that they're very confused by the wide range of tools on offer. So one of the things we're looking at is trying to just simplify access to those tools. For example, via the Ecosystem Knowledge Network website, the Tool Assessor website. So I'm basically, I try to attend events like this because I'm interested in gathering information about new tools which are emerging, which might be useful to local authorities. So that's really why I'm here. And yeah, it certainly seems like potentially a really, really powerful tool. And obviously I'm interested in the potential to apply it to different areas as well, not just London. And the sort of green space, green tree mapping has been really interesting as well. I can see great potential for that in future. So yeah, that's really my only comment at the moment. Yeah.
We've had another attendee join us online. Is that you, James? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. So to introduce yourself to everyone, and then I'm afraid we're straight into you haven't seen all the presentations that have preceded, but I did send in advance to James some much earlier slides, I think in the summer, about the focus gap. So you've got an idea of what we've been looking at. So over to you, James.
Yeah, sorry for missing earlier. I had tutorials, which were interesting, but I'm sure what you've been talking about has been good. I had a look at the web app. I assume that's what you've been talking about mostly. I think it looks really interesting, really cool. There's several of us here in the Department of Geography at King's who I think might be interested in the sorts of data that it provides. So I myself am a landscape ecologist, so I'm interested in how spatial patterns influence ecological processes, but then also the reciprocal influence of those ecological processes and how they produce spatial patterns. So it's a kind of a reciprocal relationship. Also in the department here, Rob Francis similarly is a landscape ecologist and he's worked more than me, certainly actually in urban settings. And Mike Chadwick also is an aquatic ecologist who's worked in urban systems. And I think these sort of data would be really interesting to look at some of the sorts of questions we have in landscape ecology. So, for example, one of the things that landscape ecology is interested in is the influence of patch size. So, with regards to climate change, how does patch size mitigate climate impacts? And so that might be useful for thinking about green infrastructure in terms of thinking about, well, the kind of classic many small or several larger. But also we're interested in connectivity, so thinking about ecological connectivity across space. So there's several of us in the department working on questions like that, and we have students every year working on these sorts of things. A few years ago, we had a conference at King's in conjunction with EALA UK, the International Association of Landscape Ecology. And out of that, it was a really good meeting. Out of that, we produced a book, and I think there's some interesting case studies in there that might be relevant here too. Shall I talk briefly about the web map and what I thought about that?
Yes, and then also the PhD student as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, don't forget about that.
Well, I can talk about Kyung first, actually. So Rob Francis and I supervised a student who was looking at using Giggle data to look at urban infrastructure across London, and she finished her thesis last year, I think it was now. And so she was looking at exactly some of these questions that I was talking about, looking at some different ways to measure spatial pattern. So using those to measure characterize, I suppose, spatial pattern of the urban green space across London, and then thinking about that from a climate change adaptation perspective, from a resilient ecosystem services perspective, but then also, so she was thinking about things like carbon storage and sequestration, and how that differs across the green infrastructure across London, but also then within BIDs, the business improvement districts. She was thinking about how they've been used differently in different places. So, as I said, Rob Francis was the primary supervisor there, so he could probably talk a little bit. If you're interested in that stuff, he's probably a better person to talk to than me, but I was involved a little bit as well. Yeah, so the roadmap, I think it looks really great. I think it's really interesting. I particularly like the ability to download the chart data. And one of my questions was, and this, I'm sorry if you've already discussed this while I wasn't there, is whether there is functionality to download the actual hexagon data that could be used in a spatial database or a GIS. And one of the reasons I'm interested in that is because I think looking at that spatially, well, that's really important for the sorts of questions that we have in landscape ecology. But also, I think our students would, would come up with questions that I can't even kind of anticipate at the moment. They're always, it's amazing how you can give them data sets and they start to explore it in ways that you haven't really thought about. And we already do this to some extent. We run an undergraduate pathway through our program called Geocomputation and Spatial Analysis, and for that we've actually kind of curated our own London database using, and that's for human and physical geography, so that's got census data in it, OS green space data, air quality data from London Air. We've got Airbnb data on Airbnb across the city. And some of the indicators in the web map would be really great to add to that, because our students then kind of analyze these databases looking for spatial patterns, looking for doing cluster analysis, spatial connectivity analysis, and I think there'd be some really interesting things to look at there. We also have master's degrees, and the students during their dissertation, I'm sure, would find these sorts of data really interesting to look at. We have sustainable cities masters. We have a master's degree on climate change, environmental modeling, and so I think, so yeah, I guess I think the functionality looks great. And I guess my question, which I'm sorry if it's already been answered, was about access to the ability to query the data spatially, not just kind of individual hexagons. I maybe haven't played with it enough, but and to download those data like that.
Yeah, can I start?
Yeah, hi, Sam here. I work with the GIS team. So wherever possible, we'll make all the spatial data available to the data store. That includes text geography. Your question was sort of suggested that you would perhaps like it sort of as an API.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, either way, but an API would be amazing. Does one exist? Because our students, yeah, we teach them Python, and they could learn how to use the API. I think that'd be really valuable for them. Yeah.
Okay, so the data just as sort of flat spatial files, where it's possible, it'll be on the data store. You've got to grab it, add it to your pack of data for your students. We're also upgrading the data to the data store to integrate API functionality as well. So this could be one of the first sort of candidate data sets to push through that API if there's demand for that.
Yeah, no, cool. And I guess a follow-on question then is kind of how the hexagon geography matches onto existing geographies, and how you just I mean, it'd just be really interesting to find why you decided to use hexagons and that kind of topology. Yeah, and how do you have metadata that because what am I asking here? How does that map onto the LSOA geography, for example?
So one thing I did mention earlier is part of why we've selected the hex grid is that TFL is moving towards, and what is it compared to LSOA is that sort of a consistent geography, so it makes it easier for comparison, and it's like a finer resolution than LSOA can be, but in terms of why TFL picked that grid, you might know that.
Okay.
One thing that helps describe the network of the transport system better than anything that's based on residential geography like census data or output. So they did a load of different tests on different grid sizes and shapes. And I don't know the full justification why they ended up at 350 meters. I guess it probably does that difference if it's 400 or 350 or 300. You've got to come with a number at some point. So they decided on this this grid system and the size of the hexes. And obviously we thought there's no point in inventing another one. So we'll use this one, and at least because it's not here.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks very much. Do we have Mike?
Okay, Mike, do you want to, James, if you can mute yourself, and Mike?
Yep.
I've got your slide, so just tell me to press next slide.
Okay. So what I wanted to give here was an overview of some of the stuff we do at the University of Leicester and in collaboration with the National Centre for Earth Observation. So we've got quite a long history of working on land surface temperature, and we've also been looking at urban heat from space. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is a slide that is probably horrific to all the people talking about higher resolution. So the data points here are at a kilometre resolution, and this is what the majority of the land surface temperature data is currently around. You've got two very long data sets that have provided this 1 kilometre data. And before I move on to some data that's at a bit higher resolution, I just want to say that for the kind of activities that we're looking at in the urban environment, this data still very much has a place in what we're looking at here. And while the other maps I'll show you are higher in resolution and can show details about the areas here, building a long time series of data so that we can actually understand the temporal cycle of the temperature and also the magnitude of things like heat waves that hit the city, how long they affect for and how long their effects last is quite important. But I've just got a couple of examples of this. If we go to the next slide. This is focusing on a fairly significant heat wave that was affected the UK. So on the top, we've got average summer land surface temperatures from the instrument MODIS. So if you can see London, yes, it's of course resolution, but you can still see some of the central areas standing out. And we can see where the average temperature is on the left for the daytime and on the right for the nighttime. And you can see that there was a heat wave, and this was in 2003. And you can see that the temperatures jumped dramatically by over 10 degrees during the day. And we're talking around 5 to 9 degrees during the night. And we get this kind of data very regularly. So MODIS, it gets 2 images per day, usually over London. So while we do lose out on a lot of the spatial information that you're putting into these kind of tools that we've been looking at previously, you do get a good idea of how stable this is and how big of a change we're talking when we see these temperature spikes. This is also quite important if you want to try and understand, are there precursors to these? Can you see influences building up before there are these heat risks? Because while mapping the spatial extent of them after it's happened or while it's happening is useful, being able to work with prediction and models to try and work out whether we think there is something bad happening can help us in the long term. But if we go to the next slide, please. This is looking at some higher resolution data. So a couple of times so far already, you've heard Landsat mentioned. So Landsat, in addition to the visible data, which people have been using for the vegetation mapping, it also does have some thermal channels. Now, the accuracy of these thermal channels isn't quite as good as the ones that we're looking at those 1 kilometer resolutions, but it is still very capable of picking out good spatial structure of heat. So here's an example that I bring up quite nicely here, and you can see that London City Airport has some temperature spikes. I believe the actual very bright point here, which is a higher point of temperature, is the Excel Centre, which I believe is right next to the city airport. And the ability to map at this resolution does actually convey some benefits to being able to regionalise within the city where the high risk areas are. And you can see this in a number of different resolutions, but we can get this generally around the 90 metre to 100 metre in thermal. I'll go on a little bit on some future missions that would be interested to get some feedback for, but currently that's what we're talking about when I say high resolution in the urban. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the other part that I just want to bring in. So the Excel Centre that we saw before as a high temperature point, that was uncorrected thermal, so land surface temperature, as in I assumed the same material over the entire city. Now, if we go to this classification map using the visible areas, you can see that there's actually a lot of diversity in the materials that's going on here. So you can see over the Excel Centre, where we were looking before, there's a very industrial kind of material usage here, a lot of metals and plastics, which actually means that we have to have an understanding of not only how hot the surface is, but what it's made of to truly characterize what's going on in terms of the heat. Because if you've got a highly reflective roof, it will have very different properties to kind of the slate roofs on houses and things like this. So one of the things we're moving towards when we're looking at the high resolution thermal imagery is not only getting the temperature, but also getting an idea of the emissivity, which gives us an idea of the thermal material properties of the surface we're looking at. So if I go to the next slide, please. Sadly, this is moving away from London, but this is a case study which we've done on another city, and it can be applied to London. So this is actually looking in Phoenix, Arizona, which was chosen because it's got this nice high contrast that we can see here. So this is some satellite data from an instrument called ASTER. And here you can see that the road structure is being picked out. But another one of the things I really want to show you here is you can see there's a dark patch towards the top left of the image. This is actually a large golf course that is very well irrigated. And if you've ever been to or seen Phoenix, Arizona, you'll know that it's a very arid city. So one of the issues that is of concern to councils there is, were they actually being efficient by pumping in all this water to the golf course and irrigating it? So was the cooling effect that they got from all this green vegetation actually worth the increased energy they were using to irrigate it? And yet again, because airports are always lovely in images like this, the very bright part that you can see in about the middle of the image, that's actually the airport in the middle of Phoenix. And again, that stands out very brightly. It's a large area of industrial activity, and we can get that out of this kind of data. However, as I said before, we're not just looking at the thermal, the temperature, we're also looking at the materials. So if you go to the next plot, please. So this is looking at the same city, but this is actually looking at an agricultural area that is slap bang in the middle of Phoenix, Arizona. So here we were able to look at the land surface temperature, and that's the plot on the extreme right. We were able to look at the emissivity in one of the channels, that's the plot in the middle, and we were able to match this against the NDVI for the transect. So the dotted line that cuts through both of the two images on the right, that's shown as the NDVI on the image on the left. So this, the top of these images has urban extent, it then goes into bare soil and straight into vegetation. And we can see this effect, it comes through differently within the NDVI, the emissivity and the surface temperature coming through here. So these three factors together give you an idea not just of the extent of vegetation, but it can also show the presence of irrigation. So if we're dealing with vegetation in a time of heat stress, the idea that we could tell whether this vegetation is being properly watered, whether there needs, if any effect of things like hose pipe bans, is a very realistic prospect when looking at this. So it's a good tool to identify the areas of the city that are subject to high temperatures and would be more likely to benefit from green infrastructure. Another thing that we've looked at here is trying to look at not just the parkland, but does there happen to be a long-term impact on the temperatures surrounding that parkland? We've done a study in New York, which could also be applied here, where we would look at how far away from the green infrastructure does the benefit of the green infrastructure extend in terms of the temperature mitigation on the city. So everything we've done here that can be applied to crops can also be applied to the urban vegetation. And as I said before, there's a nice long-term record that we have at admittedly coarser resolution, but it gives you some context when you want to look at these extreme events or even these snapshots. Because one of the problems that you'll have is that you don't get the high resolution thermal imagery on a very regular basis. The repeat cycles of a lot of satellites means that an exact replication can be as far apart as 16 days. And if you're monitoring a changing situation, supplementing it with this coarser resolution that can help you track the changes, even if you don't have those high resolution snapshots, can be very useful. But I just wanted to close with a point looking towards the future. And it's one of the reasons that we're not only looking towards the data that I've shown you here and working out how it can integrate, but also in what we can do together in the future, is that Leicester has been involved in a number of discussions and projects with space agencies looking to design future thermal missions, and these are looking to around 30 to 50 meter resolution. Now, there's a large lobbying action for agriculture to be represented in here, looking at field sizes and things like this. And I think that being able to add to that portfolio green infrastructure from the urban would be a very important thing. And if we can have an understanding of what people need and what's the priority to come out of that, we can help try and put that into future proposals and projects for thermal missions. So I guess I wanted to really close there, and if anyone's got any questions or comments on how you could use this data or what you'd like to see out of it, I'd be very interested.
Can I just do a check on the technical language he's just used? Are you all aware of what he's meaning when he's saying a thermal mission? I mean, it's getting a sensor up on a satellite or somehow up there that can give that higher resolution data. I just wanted to speak in a little bit plain English just to say that, and just to sort of emphasise at the moment there's a strong, we've got strong lobby from agriculture about that need. So if it could be useful for the UK's sort of cities for borough level to be able to have that kind of high resolution data. We've just seen this example of how we can actually start to use it for vegetation health monitoring as well as for climate change adaptation. Then we need to be able to tell the likes of Mike that we need it, that what use case we think would be useful for, and then that can help with encouraging government to invest in that. And potentially cities could actually invest in the sensors themselves if they wanted high resolution data as well. So that's another thing to think about. Sorry to cut in there, Mike. I just wanted to.
No problem.
Sometimes we talk about satellite data in a kit, and it's a whole other world to many. So.
Most people won't ask the question. Okay, cool. So I think that's it now for our industry colleagues.
Yeah.
I'll go through that now. You should be able to do that very well.
Yeah, okay. Right, so I'm just going to talk more from the systems point of view, just with a single slide, and then Andy's going to go into more detail on a few applications. I wanted to talk about something called the Copernicus Climate Data Store. Some of you may know about this. So it's part of the Copernicus program, which is funded by the European Commission. So the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, or ECMWF, which is based in Reading in the UK, is the entrusted entity who are delivering the Copernicus Climate Change Service for the European Commission. And there's lots of things they're spending money on, but one thing they've done is spend money on the Copernicus Climate Data Store, and Hellospatio were contracted to build the climate data store. It was released in June. The beta version was released in June. There's a snapshot of the front page, top left there. I realise, looking at the slide, I've not put the URL on, so I'll tell you it now. This is cds.climate.copernicus.eu. Okay, yeah. And I'm just going to say a few very high-level things about it, and you can go and explore. So first of all, there's initial data on there, but the data sets are being built up quite aggressively over the next few months. The data it's all free, and not only is the data free, but there is a support facility offered by ECNWF, which is also free. So you can send an email to the support desk if you have questions, and there's certain SLAs they have to adhere to get back to you on continuing the problem. The data sets are quite diverse, so there's data sets concerning land, ocean, and atmosphere parameters. So some of them may be useful in the context of what we've been talking about today. Some things like land surface temperature that just been talked about. That is one of the variables that is available from the climate data store. And also, there's different types of data in the sense that there's historical observations, but there's also seasonal forecast data available, and there's also decadal forecast data as well. There's also diversity of interfaces, so there is the web portal, but what may be particularly useful in the context of what we've heard today around what's been demonstrated is maybe the API, because you might find that some of the data can be useful for you to put in and add value to some of your parameters you have there. A lot of the data is quite dynamic, of course, because it varies depending on the time of day or seasonal. There's also various quality metrics that will be implemented on the data as well. That's been a key user requirement, so that's coming. And yeah, I think I've already made the point about the fact that I think there's a lot of potential for added value in various monitoring and mapping applications, maybe what we've heard today, but also some of you may have other things where this could be useful, because you can just pull the data directly through an API. And I'll just put a couple of screenshots of potential applications in the urban kind of context. And precipitation, flooding, snow can have economic impact, which can be interesting. Well, there's health impacts, of course, due to climate change. And then there's agriculture applications, and he's going to get into that more. So that's what civil I'm thinking. Sure.
So I'm Andrew Ivanovsky. I work for Concepcio, but very much on the geoinformation end, so looking at translating these data services into exploited products, creating multivariate model using parameters such as these climate data services, but without data that may be available from spectrum imaging, LiDAR data, that kind of thing. In the case of AgriClass, we took some of that climate data from the climate data store, and we looked at 3 different vegetative classes. Now, if you obviously jump over the fact that 2 of these places in the world serve as great holiday destinations, the reason to be looking at beech forestry, olives, and grapes for viticulture, the vineyard, and the wine industry, is that as woody perennial crops, they take a number of years to mature to any sort of useful form for agriculture. And because the average productivity life is 50 years, there's a huge setup cost in moving these plantations where we're seeing climate change. So European farmers are already experiencing some of the climate-induced stresses and also a movement of pests and disease, not just because pests may be introduced to a new landscape, but because the climate of the landscape is changing to be more favourable
to those pets. If we consider as well that some of these classes have considered the climate memory, the year-on-year degradation is more than cumulative. And also these species don't have particularly wide range of climate conditions that they thrive in, so industries are considerable. And the upshot is, although these aren't classes that particularly have any bearing on London or even the urban landscape, what's interesting is that these data products were generated because we had an understanding of different climate models, with climate data store, but also had on-the-ground knowledge of the phenology of particular species that we were looking at. And so it is conceivable that if we understood species of trees in London, because we had the hyperspectral data, for example, that Mary's working on, and we understood what their structure is, because of the work that Phil was talking about with LiDAR, and we could see how they evolved over time, coupled with the climate data, the decadal change climate data, we can get an understanding from a green infrastructure perspective of how we need to address change in the way oak trees, for example, guessing, right, will be thriving in climate common, and what we need to do as a community to future-proof those green spaces. It also has some bearing on what we encourage people to do, perhaps with their backyards, and what are we seeing in our animal life in terms of the way bees might be moving in gardens. We know that bees are on the decline, and we have to introduce bees to keep populations up. But what is it that we can be doing? Is there an impact that's purely climate related, other than from another single source? And so how can we mitigate that? So it's just one area that we thought that perhaps there's an opportunity to work together in some way. And for all these, I'm happy to field any conversations afterwards if you have some ideas. So separately, so this isn't related to the climate data store. This is a particular product that we developed called Forest Watch in combination with Leicester University, actually. And so we're working initially in Malaysia, combining optical data processing. So missions like the Sentinel missions, Sentinel-2 rather, which is optical near-infrared wavelength bands, but also the Sentinel-1 mission, which is a C-band radar sensor. And we're finding that the combined fidelity that the two sensors provide in terms of change detection is quite, it has a useful combination effect, particularly with forest monitoring. So if we look at these two scenes, and I'll click on, and the product space that this sits under is ESOS, which is Earth Sea Observation System. The project was led by Satellite Applications Catapult. We were a primary subcontractor for the algorithm and system development, and Leicester would play a role in the algorithm development for Sentinel-1 processing. So these two scenes, the following scene was acquired less than 3 months later, and there's some obvious change within the scene that you can see even at a visible level. And so using the algorithm of this offering, we can see that there's some new paths, we believe, being introduced. If we follow that yellow line between those two scenes, that path goes all the way into this area here, really. And there's some areas of suspected deforestation, which isn't. So this isn't trying to be a system that is diagnostic and foolproof. It acts as a notification system of where to undertake further on-the-ground investigations. And in London, perhaps if there was a tree preservation order across parts of London, and we wanted to monitor those closely, then perhaps these maybe with a more high resolution satellite than Sentinel, but perhaps it's that that would be used to both work as protection, but also for enforcement. And the third thing I thought I'd bring is structural health monitoring. Now, this is a process where we're looking over periods of time about ground deformation of structures, and it doesn't really have a true green infrastructure ring to it. But if we consider that we're looking at the protection of wetlands and green spaces, and there's certain pieces of infrastructure that are potentially hazardous to that green space, then it is potentially an area where we should consider that kind of monitoring service. And with this service, you can, for instance, if there's going to be a construction or development of some kind, you can understand what a baseline ground motion position is. In this case, the red dots are all up to, or below, I'll say below, greater than 9 millimeters of subsidence in here, with some error bars, but that's at the high end. So these areas of red are areas of subsidence. Areas of blue, which there are only fewer areas of upland. And over a long period of time, you can see that there's a decline in this particular location from 2011 to 2014, 3-year period. We're seeing approximately 60 millimeters change. Again, there are, but it's of that order of magnitude. And so, maybe in a particular location, London clays are prone to subsidence, and oftentimes building across that space aren't necessarily impacted if there's even settling. It becomes interesting if you see an area of uplift and an area of subsidence within a building footprint. And we've seen cases of those in Italy where buildings have collapsed. The thresholds haven't been particularly high, they've been reached, but the combined effect has been quite large. Now, this particular product is a well-established product, but we're working at the moment on looking at 3D BIM modelling and translating that into building by building statistics on 3D views like roof rotations, etc., but also with the overall structural health of the dwelling or building. Well, that's right. This is the last slide, so we're good. We're good. And then here we can see if there's a known problem in a particular area that may not be related to a single building, but just creates a risk in some way. You can see the points down the middle are a traditional survey line. They show the problem, and it's good independent data. It verifies, maybe not quite the boundaries, but it verifies that there's a problem in the area. That this particular method is non-invasive, and it has a really good spatial content.
Great. I have a set of slides. I'm just going to see either whether I can put them all there. We might be able to present from my. It'd be better if we could put our presentation up there. So I've finally been allowed into the Reading system to be able to download these. So. Yeah, sorry, we're all making you work very hard for your coffee and biscuits and drink, aren't we? Kristen, you're going to have to remember about your desktop because it will probably take hours to load if I leave these very big presentations on it. Okay, so there we go. Over to you, Anne.
Okay, thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you very much for organization. So, GMB is a company working maybe in the aerospace sector. So the group in which I work is a remote sensing department. So we do remote sensing of vegetation, of water monitoring, for agriculture and natural resources and all these things. But this time I thought, because of the context of this this meeting, it would be interesting for you to know about the H2030 project that we have. That is called Urban Greenup. And it's, well, the project is a 5 years project, and we actually have 25 partners and within these partners there is the Mercy Forest, okay, the University of Liverpool and the Liverpool City Council, somewhere here. Okay, so the leader is a Spanish half public, half private organization called Canopy. So the project is about nature-based solutions, how to, it's not about how to implement them, but about how to monitor them. So you know what the benefits of nature-based solutions in urban areas are. So during the proposal, each city, Valladolid in the north part of Spain, Liverpool here, and Izmir in Turkey, defined already which are the 5 challenges that have to face. And they also identified which were the nature-based solutions that they would have to procure and implement along the project. So the nature-based solutions are, we are already at the end of the first year of the project, and they are already implementing these solutions. So the role of GMB, my company, was to coordinate the definition of the KPIs to monitor the progress that the implementation of these nature-based solutions was making with respect to fighting these challenges, mainly with dealing with related climate change, and also to design and monitor this monitoring scheme, right? So there is, in the project, there's the participation of public administration, industry, SMEs, startups, citizens, crowdsourcing, and so on. So the solutions to be proposed have to be economically sustainable and they have to favor also the creation of green jobs and things like that. And they have to be replicated. Suitable for replication in other cities. And within the project, we're going to replicate the solutions in Medellin in Colombia, Chengdu in China, and Beijing in Vietnam. So there are like 3 front-runners cities and 3 which are going to come afterwards. So this is the scheme of the project. There are the demonstrations. First, the definition from methodology, then the demonstrations, and we are in charge of the monitoring and the evaluation, and then the application is in other cities, and then the exploitation and market deployment, the coordination and communication and dissemination. So the goal of the work package dealing with monitoring and evaluation of the KPIs receives many inputs from previous work packages and different partners. There is a scenario, there are priorities, there are specific types of nature-based solutions like vertical walls, like cycling paths, like all these type of things. There is also the feedback and the priorities of the socio-economic criteria and stuff. So we came with all these inputs. We are designing a monitoring scheme based on a series of KPIs that use for measurement different types of data, because there are in-situ data, in-situ sensors, airborne data, and satellite data, providing measurements into the project. So in order to decide if the KPIs really not the start from scratch, we used a framework for measuring the green and blue infrastructures in cities that was created by the several partners, among them the University of Oxford. And that framework is Eclipse. So they defined, it's not that we took all the KPIs from Eclipse and we also proposed new KPIs which are not from Eclipse, but that was our main reference. And so GMB is also in charge of, in some specific KPIs, try the potential of different type of remote sensing data, satellite data. So, for example, there is one KPI here defined in Eclipse, like accessibility to green spaces by population. So there is a sheet, there is a table for each KPI, specifying the unit, the method for measuring, and external data, and so on. And how there's another table on how to compute it with different types of remote sensing data. So it doesn't stay. Yeah. Okay. So as I said here, this is the work package that we are coordinating, and includes the definition of a monitoring scheme based on evidence-based diagnosis. The input data that we use is satellite, airborne, and in situ, and also we are developing mobile applications for citizens engagement, like providing they can also provide data and feedback. Among the data that, because this is a European Commission's project, among the data that we are looking at to see the potential for exploitation and using the measuring of the KPIs, it's of course the Copernicus data. So the Copernicus data and the Copernicus services. Concerning the Copernicus data, we're going to use it for challenges 4, 5, and 6, which is green areas management, air quality, and urban regeneration, and possibly also for water management. So the limitation, and this is something that will come later in the discussion if we have time. The limitation of the Sentinel data is, as you mentioned before, the spatial resolution. So as a forester, I'm a forester, and I'm working in remote sensing since many years. So my approach would always be the one that was mentioned by the University of ground data, which could be ground data on the ground, or it could be LiDAR data, or terrestrial LiDAR, or even aerial data could be taken because it's more accurate than remote sensing data in some cases. But the problem of these is that it is difficult and it's not as sustainable as big data, right? So the approach, in my view, would be to use this very high resolution data that you can only have from time to time to calibrate and validate the models that you want, and then do this extrapolation, not only in space but also in time, to be able to use the Sentinel data. So the Sentinel data, the advantage that it has is that it can be obtained once a week, right? So if you have the appropriate models, you can have the bridge between the very high resolution data and the high resolution data of the Sentinel, which is between 20 and between 10 and 20 meters. You can really improve your monitoring system, right? It is true that with Sentinel-2, at the maximum you can get to scales of 1 to 30,000. Whereas this is not adequate, this is not ideal for urban monitoring management, for urban management, right? But if you do these models with very high resolution data, LiDAR data, and so on, then you can make both compatible, and both sources of information can link together the system. So the data that we are we're also using data already processed and given by the trusted entities mentioned by Geoff. At the moment, from the Copernicus land monitoring system, and also from the Copernicus atmosphere monitoring system. Mainly for the KPIs, urban regeneration and management of green spaces, and for the air quality KPI. And this is the last slide. And it's just to make you aware that urban cleanup is part of a task force made up by all the European projects dealing with nature-based solutions. And all the European Commission is connecting the different projects dealing with nature-based solutions and organizing different task forces, right? So GND is part of the task force dealing with data and platforms. So we have actions, for example, like the ones mentioned here, like collect the information, data type, storage, take care about the interoperability, methodologies of the design process, barriers, risks identified on data collection and storages, and so on. So that's it. Thank you very much. So since there are two in this project, there are two UK partners, Mercy Forest, and three, the University of Liverpool and the City Council of Liverpool. I think it would be interesting that I can give you the names of the persons working in this project, and then you can exchange information with them. GMB on the other side is not only working on this project, it's working on different projects in urban areas, agriculture, forestry, so also we're interested in discussing alternative applications. I'm also very happy to provide you with more information.
Great, thanks very much. I think there's one more left. Claire, Claire in that office, are you still with us?
Yeah, don't worry, I'll be very quick so you can get to your coffee. So this was the first time I had a chance to look and hear about the tool. So it's just a couple of observations that I have. The first is that I think your vegetation data set could be very useful. One of the things that we struggle with in the urban model is how we represent the urban land surface. So what fraction of each grid cell is vegetation and what fraction is urban? So I think having a detailed map as you have over London could be very valuable as input into our modelling. So my question on that would be, is there scope to extend this past London or beyond London to a full UK map, or would it be easy for other cities to replicate the work you have done here? And then on the tool itself, I think it has great applications. It seems, and I guess in terms of the data that we could potentially provide an input, it would be more along the climate side or the weather side. So do you envisage in the future your tool being forward-facing or forward-looking in that you'd use climate change information to understand how the urban heat island or flooding would change and base your decisions on the vegetation around that? Is that something that's in scope for the future, or is it something you haven't considered yet? That's it, thanks.
Yeah, so on the second question, in terms of sort of future iterations of this map, so obviously we're releasing it sort of as it is now, but we're pretty open to what it could be in the future based on what is useful for people, and I think being able to provide sort of projected or predicted information would be really helpful. I don't think we know at the moment what the availability of that information is, but the scales and like the type of information we're looking for. But yeah, it would be really interesting in that. The other question was, extending green cover work beyond London. So the methodology itself that we undertook is fairly straightforward, and we're going to be publishing a detailed report on that, so it could be replicated by someone. I think the limiting factor is the availability of the imagery itself. So we pay for the imagery, and it only covers London boundary, like just barely outside the London boundary. So it was sort of down to someone else being able to get the imagery. But in terms of the methods that we use to do it, that is applicable.
And the land use data as well, so paid for editor.
Yeah.
So that topped up the imagery data. So I'm sure the people who work today will keep some conversation with anybody who wants to express it.
Yeah.
But the method will be straightforward.
The land use data, was that, sorry, Andrew Gnochka. The land use data, was that a CH?
Geoinformation group?
I have a very quick point on that. The data I showed of London, there's loads of other federal ones that are taken from airborne imagery. So if you were wanting to replicate this, you could have a look on the Studio archive and you might find other cities. There's loads which are non-urban as well, cities that might be more easy.
Other questions? Thank you. Thoughts?
You do plan to update it once it's operational.
That's a good question. We have like long lists of stuff we like to do, and then we've got feedback from others. So we did a round of feedback from everyone who took over, which some of you I think are part of, and some of the recommendations are made weren't really feasible for this release. So we would like to do future ones. It's more about a matter of whether the resource and budget to be able to, like, what level of updates we could do in the future. For the green cover and tree cover work, the intention and stuff is that probably on a 5-year time scale, but that's very much dependent on what cycles are.
I guess it'd be good if you could automate a certain amount of, you must have learned a lot by doing what you've done, right? And I don't know if it's possible to automate it totally, but given, assuming certain data sets you've used this time are available next time with the updates, if you were able to automate a certain amount of it, that would lighten the resource level, I guess, for the future.
I should say too that in terms of the token as it is now, as new data sets become available, we can easily update the data sets itself. So the longer term future version is more about the structure of the tool itself. But in terms of the data sets, we can update them on a more live basis as we become aware of the data.
Yeah, all the processes scripted so we could, read pushing in the data sets. Almost as like a bunch of data. So that should make at least the maintenance of keeping it up to date. So even having, if you put a new data set on there, then the previous one is still useful, isn't it? And then you've got a whole new level of functionality potentially about how you actually analyse differences, because that will be how you start building up snapshots of data sets. Yeah. We've got certainly a phase 3, phase 4, phase 5 development card.
Can I just ask, you mentioned previously, sort of much earlier on in the presentation as well, that there was an element to being limited by using some of the high resolution data because of the computer processing. I was wondering if you could explain a bit more technically about that, not because I understand it, but some people around the room might, but because STFC, which is one of the State Climate members, is providing some computing power for an EPSLC engineering research initiative called UCRIC, which is running infrastructure analyses, and that capability will be available for London. So you can start to see and they're using the supercomputing power of what's called Jasmine that are Earth observation remote sensors use. The bit I don't understand, and some of the other people around the table or online might be able to chip in, is there is something called Jupyter Notebooks, and there is the potential to access onto the cloud. So if we were trying to get the best data solutions for London and for access for the boroughs to make decisions, and wanting to actually use the high-level data, if we can understand what the data stores sort of requirements or what the difficulties are, we might be able to see whether there is a solution or a part solution to access that cloud computing?
Yeah, so we resampled those from 10 centimeters to 25 centimeters. Clearly because it was to get around some processing problems. So tasks were taken onto an Amazon cloud machine, a pretty high spec one, and jobs were taken to a week, not quite weeks, but days and days to run. And we were iterating through lots of changes to see what worked best. So it really wasn't feasible to have that kind of like delay in sort of turnaround time to see whether changing into a certain metric. That's certainly the calculation would have any gain. So that's why we resampled just to shorten that to like a day. I'm sure if you probably stuck some more processing power behind it, that's fine. Obviously, we've got a methodology now that we're pretty happy with. So to rerun the job, would be quicker anyway. But even with the resolution of the image, I don't think we didn't lose anything for 25 centimeters. It's not so much in terms of. So I don't think there'll be much to gain probably in the output if you were to go down to 10 centimeters in this particular context. So I don't know if we need more power quite at this stage.
I think I'm thinking about down the line as people start to use these data sets, perhaps come up with tools or change detection, or there's something more powerful you're having to get done, is whether it is appropriate for the data store to run that kind of thing, or whether if we know from the outset that might be something that has to be done, cloud-based reading from the data store, and then chucking back the output there or something.
Yeah, I think the guys working on Curio on the big Earth engine, they were really complimentary of that system. So we didn't go down that route this time, but that's probably something where we can look next time, but perhaps not for some alternatives.
It might have already been covered, but I understand you're collating them all to the hexagon method. If possible, can you get the data, you want the data at a finer resolution than that if it was that originally? I know some of it, like the high resolution data, you can't, but like, can you access the data in its original form as well, or can you only get it hex?
Like for public access?
If I wanted to use it, could I get the original data set as well?
Well, we're going to publish for example, the green cover and blue cover, we'll publish the geometry, so it'll be a spatial data. But we can publish the aerial photography by using partners.
But the outputs will be available at sort of raster and data set.
Of the
green cover and the tree hand cover.
Okay.
So it would be very much.
Yeah.
So we can't, because we pay for the imagery, we can't share the imagery, but we can share the output.
From the image.
Yeah, so it's going to be a sort of like raw output, but also summarized and hex for people.
Yeah. Is there publicly funded data then?
What?
Is it publicly funded data? The capture? No. Privately funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're quite happy for us to publish the geometry, so all the the underlying stuff we create stuff like from that can go out. And if I guess it's conversation we have. If you're working hard with the GLA,
Yeah, because different things. Both on sort of the processing with the data scale and like the iterations point. I mean, the other barrier that to us doing more is just our internal resources. So we do this quite a small staff team. I mean, it's just Alan and colleague Anna on the JS with one data visualization person, one coder, and then we had one part of my time on the like actual policy side. So it's quite a small team that was able to do this. Why it took probably longer than we would have liked, and also why I'm not sure when or how an next iteration would look. So part of publishing on the methodology is also to see if there's others can sort of take what we've done and go the next step with it, and not necessarily led by us, but maybe by us.
If I understood properly, you're going to then eventually start data every 5 years?
That is the intention. Yeah. So for the green cover, it's more because we are sort of tracking against progress.
Well, what is the obstacle that prevents you from doing a more frequent updates using other scales? Because the same way for urban forestry, you need the LiDAR and look at every individual tree. There are many other variables that you have in the system that you may want to have because they are useful, that you don't need such a big data scale. and you will be doing fantastically with Sentinel-2 and then major pixel. So if this is data is for free and it's easily to automate easy variables. I mean, you can also do complex models and take the Sentinel data to high resolution and take LiDAR data, ground data, and combine it. You cannot complicate your life as much as you want. But with Sentinel data, you can do very easy things and NVIDIA vegetation readiness indexes, and you can automate that. And you can put in the same environment, within the same platform, different scales for different purposes, because one of the things that are normally done within the GIS or the decision support system is to adapt the data and aggregate it or disaggregate it, like statistics, depending on the final user and depending on the final purpose. Yeah. So can those type of scales live within the...
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, the driver behind this is very much measuring against a couple of our sort of mayoral manifesto commitments and environmental strategies, which is increasing green cover and increasing green county cover. So that was like sort of the driving purpose of being here, and those are what we're measuring against ultimately. We had looked into using Sentinel to do sort of more frequent updates. We're looking annually. And we didn't go down that path that deeply, and we are not experts by any means, so we've been learning a lot of this on the way. So it might be that there's an answer in the group, but we, part of that, was able to calculate the level of detail we wanted at the London scale. Like, it was really good. We saw at identifying change over time in like certain spots, but not being able to sort of aggregate that into like a total figure, percentage cover, and the change on like a year, like an annual basis. I mean, the other thing too is, like, I think that any methodology trying to measure like change in green cover at like an annual basis probably is just too difficult, I think, to capture within like the margin of error, I think, what we actually run, but the change. And I think from the sort of political perspective of how we're tracking this information, there needs to be like sort of more certainty to be able to have that change.
Did you make any cost comparison with very high resolution satellite data from planet or digital planet? Half a meter pixels against area data? I don't know. Maybe area data is cheaper.
Well, we haven't. We purchased it for other reasons.
We already have the data.
We kind of want to have it, so we didn't necessarily do like a proper analysis. What was
like this for the applications? You want to use very high resolution satellite data?
Yeah, I think absolutely right. Something more frequent in Sentinel data was something we've discussed. This is kind of a deep dive into coming up with a number or a range for green cover and things like that, which would be difficult to replicate because all the old green would change in 5 years' time, obviously, and there's also sharing. But something that changes over time more frequently.
And we'd be interested if there's sort of avenues that I know that we could necessarily like look at to be able to track that faster. I mean, one of the big concerns is, of course, there's a tension in London between trying to protect the green space that we have and increase it, but also all the development that is happening and sort of the new policies that are in place to try to accelerate housing development. And so there's very, very much tension in that, and ways to track that is another thing that we are interested in, but it is tricky, just trying to capture change over time, I think. That's very much a question for us.
Are there any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, it looks really interesting to me, and I'm just listening to all of this, thinking about some of the projects that I'm working on, things around supporting how we understand and deal with heat risk. So there's some really interesting stuff there, and also monitoring of adaptation. I think that there is a thing that we can do with a lot of this information. There's a lot to think around. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to offer any final thoughts or reflections. I think it would be just quite helpful to know, we've done this as a kind of, it's like a knowledge exchange session really, and we've sort of heard what the GLA has been working on. We've also heard from some of the boroughs around how you're seeing that as useful, and also us start to understand what data sets you might be interested in at borough level for borough management. Is there anything from those sort of round the table that you would want in terms of us sort of taking this forward? I mean, Kristen and I sit on the London Climate Change Partnership as well, representing the Spatial Climate Group. We have access to the researchers who we've brought here in the industry. Is there something you want to do further down the line, or something you would like to know more information specifically about, on us to organise a webinar, or anything we can do to help you?
And also, in considering that the funding of the sector is potentially workers, we have colleagues in public health and NHS, and we've got colleagues in the built environment sector, and we've got colleagues all over the place, so that, also think a little bit laterally and appropriately.
So perhaps maybe we could just go maybe around the room just to make sure that everyone's had a chance. There's some last thought or a request. Yeah.
Well, absolutely, yes, I guess on the practical usage of it as how you manage it would be very useful for GI managers.
I guess from a policy perspective is how to incorporate into the evidence-based studies that will inform on local plans and develop at a local level.
We're really here with expertise to support the industry. We're open-minded to how that would look in terms of a partnership. But we're really here to try and support the industry as is required and to obtain appropriate funding sources to support that.
Yeah, I'm keen to. But one thing I'm particularly interested would be to go the next step further, and maybe you could have some sort of risk mapping, so like flood risk based on the environmental data that you collect. That could be a resource for people to use at lower levels.
Yeah, so we have flood risk mapping from the EA. Yeah, we have urban heat island data that we have in there just based on the genome model. It's not best information, we're trying to find updated data for that.
There's also flood risk data. I've had discussions before, people work with the underground in London, not just like TFL, but there is actually quite a lot of assets and built environment assets underground. And trying to understand the relationship between vegetation, different types of vegetation, soil moisture, soil movement, water coming through or not coming through, the kind of underworld aspect of it. There are huge data gaps, if I'm right, and that's not sort of, that was maybe an out-of-date 2 years ago discussion, but is that something you're interested in for your...
It's not something we've included in this, because sort of groundwater flooding type issues are not something that we infrastructure specifically can address, but it is sort of a broader issue, I think, like TFL, and it's part of the transport sector work that we're doing as well, to look at particular issues. So TFL, I mean, most of their flooding is due to water main breaks, I think, or leaking and stuff. But there's also that element related to that of subsidence and breaking pipes and things like that, and we're free install or something like that. So it's all kind of linked up together. And they are looking at it. Yeah.
But yeah, something we don't know is whether elements of green infrastructure are providing services towards reducing those risks or increasing them as well. And so that's where we need far more sort of data to do this change detection to actually we don't have an answer.
So there's a study in Merseyside which looked at pilot model to looking at how changing the amount of kind of green space in a city would directly impact on flood risk. So they applied it to the green roofs and to something like that 10% run rate.
Because here there's contradiction between landscape. Flood risk is a very dynamic environment, right? And you cannot have a database of trees that is static and it's only updated every 5 years and use that evaluate flood risk, because flood risk it has to be evaluated minimum every season, minimum, right? So I would be interested in looking at the ways that in an operative and efficient way this database could be updated and with different type of sensors, with different type of scales and targeting a different type of variables indicators.
Yeah, I think for us, flood mapping is also definitely really useful. But also just what I mentioned earlier about kind of delving deeper into the biodiversity elements, especially around kind of identifying sites.
Yeah, I think just the web map from earlier, just as it is, would be a real sort of step up in terms of the way that actually uses modelling, spatial modelling. So at the moment, it's quite hard. I think in London, in general, to get the point across of green infrastructure developers, because we use a separate web map, then we use Magic Maps, so if you're aware of that, and that would really just sort of map out things like priority habitat, and that's quite hard to sort of translate into just green infrastructure for developers. So something like the web map there that shows things like the street trees and tree canopy, I think that is something that we don't have as a tool yet, and I think that would really sort of align really well with us, because Natural England are really sort of taking a lead with new GI standards and the 25-year environment plan for sort of leading that aspect of it. I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, it was a great tool. It's really well developed. Happy to talk a little bit about the products that we can use and try and integrate it. I think next.
So I'd be interested in seeing your chat about the outputs of your Canopy cover and stuff.
So our partner at Federal Labs, I think, was going to get in contact with somebody involved for it. So Connor, the intention was to get in contact with him.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that was the biggest thing we noticed that was missing in what we did with the tree canopy work was LiDAR data.
Yeah.
So a lot of our error was something that would probably be resolved with LiDAR.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that they're targeting to do the next, do you have any round of it, but they're very much.
Yeah, if you could get a name on
yeah.
get in touch with somebody there, yeah. Really.
That's sort of with your Canopy cover there that you came up with, like you said about updating more at the time. If I can relate what the work we've done to that and see then if it's fairly accurate, then you can scale up and use it much more easily.
I discovered from our side. I think we're interested in maintaining the links sort of from the satellite data side and how that can support what's being done, and maybe sort of also on any indicators that can be derived to help analyse risk and support decision making.
Great. I actually have a question and two offers. So I'll just say it all, and then the question is, and that's for the benefit of all the data people here and that we can take back, is if they have a data there that they believe would be really relevant to this, or time series even, relevant to the focus map, how do they get in touch, and do you have a kind of requirement sheet so that they only get in touch with data that is actually ready to go? And particularly, I think picking up on that API point, I'm not technical, but if there are specific requirements that would work then to the data store to be able to pick it up, or things that must or must not be there, I think knowing that would help. Then the two offers on the table, maybe for progressing some of these things, would be one, to allow you that if you do make use of Sentinel data, we could go via the route ESA, so the European Space Agency do have calls for projects. So we could, if there is an idea around the table that has been sparked from this about making use of Sentinel data, what I'd recommend is you actually take it forward, develop up the project proposal, and the minute a relevant call comes, we can allow you and you can just put it in, and if funding's the barrier for people's time being funded, or development of an algorithm, we might be able to do it by one of those if it's quite small. The other offer I'll put on the table with the organisation that's not here, because I kind of represent them, one of the group members, the Institute for Environmental Analytics at the University of Reading. They do have a demonstrators program. They did one called Bounty with Manchester, which I'm familiar with. So if there is something around visualization or exploration about how you take this data and pull it to borough level and create a visual tool, or add in some of the Sentinel data or something like that, we might be able to do it depending on the nature of the project through the demonstrator function. That would be for a smaller project, not a big ambitious one, but it might be a way to pursue something. So.
I mean, just to follow up on that, there are some permanent movable calls from Easter, which Joel was having.
Every 3 months you can present a proposal, and the project is not very high. It's 150 mark, 150, and there are several topics. In which you have to focus, and one is innovation, sustainable development, things like that. So finding the right topic.
And people are still there on the phone, Mike, do you have anything you just wish to add?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd mainly come back to the point that there's a lot of interesting projects going on here and the usage of data, and I feel that we do have some data on our end that we would like to be able to put into a number of these tools and projects. And I'd really love some kind of feedback or integration on how and what would be useful to you from these kind of thermal remote sensing products. So that would probably be the priority for me.
Can I just make one final point before we wrap up? I'm really just interested in GLA's position on what it sees as it goes forward and releases these data services, what it sees as value, and is it about GLA's internal consumption of the data and planning, or is it about outside users downloading and using it for other purposes? Where do you see, how are you judging this to make the case for the value funding?
Well, specifically with 5-year funding, it's very specific to monitoring progress against our own sort of targets. But I think more broadly, we want whatever sort of data work that we do to be available to the public. I mean, we try to make anything that we do and put it up on the data store and usable in some way. We're actually sort of rapidly increasing the number of web maps and things that we are going to try to make it easier for people to use. I'll say, scope organization and what gets funded from year to year changes, and it's not necessarily, sort of based on like programmatic desires. I think that's very much applicable. So I'll just say I'll say that way.
Okay, but in terms of what's already been funded and created, what would you say your judge of value might be as you go forward? So if for example, users are demanding a particular data source more than another, and gathering further user requirements from that community that say, oh, we like what you've done here, but it only meets 80% of the need. How are you kind of bringing that back into GLA? Or is there a thought around that? Sorry.
Well, I'd say the data store is obviously a platform where we fish out all of that data.
Yeah.
We have got a lot better at publishing data. And this point around every plan and then there's a whole supporting data set on the data store along with it is where we want to be. So I think with these couple of projects working at the moment is like sort of the first time where we're actually going to push all our code out, put all the data out where we can. So I think we're sort of at the beginning of that journey and trying to flesh that out, and then it'll be listening to us to see what we're doing, whether it's right, and good to be.
I don't think we necessarily see ourselves, certainly from the environment, being a data provider and sort of like permanently collecting and updating all this data. I don't think we're the best people to do it. We're not really staffed in that way. But we're hoping that sort of in this case there was specific need that we were able to sort of opportunistically fun resource, and hope that that can just be a catalyst for other people to do more on that. Yeah.
So, okay, and then if we go back to this community here, do we feel as a community we're in a good place to be working with GLA to gather those requirements to understand what's being used and how we can maybe centralise the maintenance?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of this screen itself. I mean, it's just sort of start that conversation about particular tools and such things that's nice for people to use. Yeah, I would be interested also then, to see where the learning comes from as that goes and see how we can learn from that. I'm going to close the meeting now. We are 15 minutes over, or 13 minutes over time. We have the room for a bit longer if people do want to chat. There's still cookies and there's still coffee, so people feel like hanging around. And I think, was there also, Brian, was there a problem? Oh yeah, I just put just in case you wanted to continue the conversation beyond the time of the meeting for, I just suggested, I'm trying to remember, it's the white horse, isn't it? The white heart. Yeah, it's just where we use just literally along and right. Sorry, that's not helpful, but I really put the postcode down, but it is a short walk, and then it's a short walk from there to the tube station, so it's just a nice part. Hang out. Let me just...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great for organising this.
Okay. I just need to close this meeting. Oh, yeah.